Welcome to the Lazy CEO podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host and founder of the CEO Project. Hey, today we're going to talk about organizational design. Let's start with the basic principle of organizational design, and that is that there is no perfect structure, ever. Everybody's looking for it. They're like, I'm going to tweak this and twiddle that and move that and change that. And the answer is, no matter what organizing principle you use, it's never perfect. And really the only question you got to ask yourself is, what inefficiencies or problems or deficiencies in that particular structure am I willing to tolerate? Because it changes based on the approach you take. You know, one structure has this set, one has another set. And so it's really about what's the most important for you to optimize, and where are you willing to give something back? Because there is no perfect. Stop looking for it. And I can tell you that, you know, I've reorganized and managed enough companies that there is no ideal way to do this. There's only the one you choose and the one you choose to live with and try to make it work as best you can for you. The second, before I get into the details, is you got to be just a little bit careful about how often you reorganize. So, some people think it's a tool that we do every year, and you've heard about these large organizations that are frequent reorganizers. I'm going to tell you that that is really detrimental to your organizational performance. Any change that you put an organization through, it has negative consequences, but I'll just talk about one at this point, and I'll talk about more later. You know, when you disrupt the heck out of the organization through a change in structure, a change in reporting, a change in whatever, you go back into instability for a while. And, you know, think about a team formation. There's forming, storming, norming, storming, performing, right? So if you reorganize your whole company, you got to go back into, okay, form it up. Normalize, norm, how are we going to work together? Storm, start to create value, and then perform. So you got this lag every time you go through a reorganization process as the organization wraps its head around what you just did before you get back to performance. And so just be careful how often you do it. I'm going to say this is one of those, occasional tools used when the current structure is no longer delivering its value, no longer delivering the results you want, and it's clear that the structure is the thing getting in the way. So those are just two overarching things to think about when you're contemplating organizational design. Let's dig in a little bit. So the first element, how do I think about the structure that I should have in my organization? And it's actually an old saying, but it is true. Structure follows strategy. Structure follows strategy. So I could take somebody who I've never seen their business before, ever. And I go, all right, what's your strategy? And they explain their strategy. And I say, okay, more or less, your organization should or could look like this based on that strategy. In other words, without knowing anything else about the organization, I could probably draw a pretty decent org chart just based on a detailing of the strategy. So let's just explore that for a second. Cost is one basis of competitive advantage. We're trying to be the low cost provider. So what would a structure look like that was focused on cost? Well, all of the cost elements I'd organize around them so I could optimize them. Deep operational expertise, deep supply chain expertise, focus on those areas. Accounting, deep focus on accounting, because every nickel and dime matters in a cost-based business. What about R&D? Maybe none, maybe zero. What about, deep customer service? probably thin, smaller operation, maybe tucked in underneath somebody else because it's not a critical process to our success. So the idea is think about the critical processes to your success and elevate those in your organizational design. Let's say that we're customer intimate as a model. I would probably want to see a structure that had a lot of customer success people, maybe a whole group dedicated to customer success, solutions engineering, figuring out how to deliver the most value for a client, probably a bit of innovation in that organization. What about cost focus? Actually, not that important. And so supply chain minimized, reduced in importance down the organization, a lower level person in charge of it. What about accounting? You know, enough, but I don't have to be over rotated to accounting on that because nickels and dimes don't matter in that structure. It's more about customer facing, delivery of the service, delivery with high quality, creativity about solving problems, owning the solution, owning the outcome when you do that. What if I'm an innovator? Like Apple or Google. I'm going to have lots and lots. I'm going to have a big operation in innovation, R&D, engineering, development, whatever you happen to call innovation in your particular organization. And I probably have, a pretty healthy marketing organization, to try to present that, to try to deliver it to the market, to try to find the right clients for our creative, innovative products. Because a big part of innovation is like, what are we going to do with it? Like when they develop Post-it notes, they probably had to think about how are we going to use a sticky glue that isn't so sticky. There's a story about that I won't get into, but so cost, customer focus, or innovation are three fundamental ways of developing competitive advantage, and they drive a particular way of organizing the company by what roles are elevated to senior position with heavy people on them, what roles are minimized because they're not that important, for example. So I'll give you an example. I had a company I worked with that was technology really mattered in this company. It was all about developing competitive advantage through the technology and the development of apps and fast flows of information around the business. And guess where IT and development reported into the CFO. So does that make sense? No, because that's so important to our success. I cannot subordinate that job. I've got to elevate that role. I've got to bring it up to the executive team, and that group should report in because it's so central to our success going forward. I'll give you another example. Many times I'll see in talent-driven businesses like management consulting, professional services of various flavors. I go, where's your HR leader report into? Oh, I think she reports to the second director of IT or something like that. It's like a person in a closet that we throw popsicles at. Crazy. If talent is central to your business, that is effectively your product, then HR has to be an elevated role. It has to have a significant level person. So this is all about organizational design. Where should the HR person report? Tell me how important talent is to your business. That'll dictate where your HR person should report, right? How important is sales? So for example, I'll give you another one. I had a company I worked with. It was all about, they did home installation of security systems. There were two things that were super important and created all the value in this business: the marketing and sales and the installation in the house. So those two people had big organizations, lots of mass, and reported very high into the organization. Other roles, not so much. And frankly, when we tried to elevate other roles that were less critical, they suffered because they didn't belong there. And it was clear because nobody wanted to listen to what they had to say because it just wasn't important to delivering the result in the company. And you might even think about this as you think about your executive team. So when I get together and everybody's talking, who does everybody turn off because they really don't care about what that person has to say? That tells you that you may have that role over elevated in your organization. On the other hand, if you've got somebody who says, hey, make sure you bring Brian or Maria or whoever up to the exec team meeting regularly, that tells you that that role is really critical and maybe they're not reporting in at the right level of the organization. So the other element within sort of thinking about structure following strategy is process flows. So I was recently working with a company that had, and here's the evil word to watch out for in this line of thinking. Handoffs. Handoffs between departments, handoffs between silos, handoffs between leaders. Why? Handoffs take time, cost money, and create errors all the time. So you want to minimize the number of handoffs as the flow of value goes through your organization. There's a classic Harvard Business School article that talks about staple yourself to a customer. And the idea is follow your customer through your customer journey when they experience doing business with you, and watch how many times you're handed off. It's one of the things that makes us crazy when we deal with companies. So ideally, when you organize in a way that the customer is never handed off. Order comes in, it's resolved. They're always talking to the same people. They don't have to get handed off. They got a credit problem, same people deal with that. They've got a service problem, same people deal with that. Now, the work may get done by different people, but the way a customer experiences your company is with no handoffs. And ideally, even in the back office, if you will, no handoffs or very limited handoffs, owned by one person. So we used to organize this order fulfillment, we would call it. And we're very clear about when it started and when it ended. Order was created by sales. It was taken by order fulfillment everywhere there, all the way out to a bill. That was what they created, a shipped product and a bill, so forth. So process is it. I think the other thing, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but don't get hung up on titles. This is an area for a little creativity. It makes people's nuts because like they're careerists, because like I want to move from manager to senior manager to director to vice president to senior vice president in this logical, wonderful progression. I think, we've mostly rotated away from that as a culture. Name it for what they do and don't worry so much about the title that you're giving them. Give them something that identifies the responsibility they have. So within that, that was really a structural, competitive advantage driven view of strategy, of structure. There is another way to look at it, which is talent driven. And all the time when we're talking about structure with people, they go, well, I got this A player, where do I put her? Or she is running sales and she is incredibly valuable. I don't want to take anything away from her. I don't want to change her responsibility. She's so incredibly important. Well, I hear you, but you got to do what you got to do. And if you're getting blocked by talent, you got to find a way around that. Now, sometimes this is where, no structure is perfect. Occasionally we make accommodations from what we would consider a perfect structure to something that is a little less than ideal, but deals with the fact that we've got pockets of talent that we want to take advantage of in the organization. So how do you do that? It's a very hard question. So let's talk about how much do you flex for talent? And I'm going to break talent into two buckets. One is high performers in the role, and the other is high potential, people I want to develop, people are going to run the company in 5 or 10 or 20 years that I want to pour into, I want to invest into. So the first idea is on high performers, I want to, you want to think about where do I want an A on the report card, which goes back to how do I create value in the organization and for my customers. Excuse me. That's where you want your performers. So we've looked at structures before where somebody says, I'm really flagging on sales. I need a better sales organization. I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm not making my numbers. And then we go look at the assessment of the sales leader, the marketing leader, and they're rated a C. They're a low performer, perform below target. Well, we're like, gosh, why would you have a C performer in your most critical and most not working well process? And maybe the two are correlated. So I would think about when I'm trying to find a place for high performers, A players, but maybe not with a ton of potential, look at where do I not want to have to think about it? In other words, I'm going to limit the number of fronts where I have to worry as a leader. So I'm going to take one of my processes, I'm going to hand it to an A player, and I'm not going to have to worry about it because they got it done. And I'll limit my focus to a couple of other processes where I don't have A players to drop in place, whether it's upgrading talent or improving process or whatever. On high pots, I do think you want to put them in important positions. Why? Because you're investing for the future. So it isn't the case of putting high performers in every position and then off with no potential and off we go. That's a great way to have an ongoing business, but it limits your upside potential. And oh, by the way, nobody's getting a promotion because they're not promotable. Even more, and when I'm designing organizations after I've sort of put the boxes on the paper and I'm thinking about who goes in the boxes, there's this concept of blockers that you need to be aware of. So the next CEO of your company is on your executive team right now, probably, maybe. If not, they're one layer down and they're going to your executive team at some point in the near future. But here's the thing. Let's say I've got an executive team full of high performers or decent performers or legacy people that are not high performers, but I want to get rid of them because it's my sister's cousin's brother's roommate or whatever. They block the future talent development of your organization. In other words, I got a great CFO and he or she isn't going anywhere. And I've got a really sharp, snappy young person underneath them that I want to develop. They're blocked by the CFO because CFO ain't going anywhere. I got to get them out from underneath or I got to move them around. There have been times where I had very high tenure people that were decent, not outstanding performers. And I moved them out solely to create a training role for a high potential player. That's how serious this is, that you would lose a decent performer in exchange for making a room for a high performer to learn the job, learn the business, and develop themselves over time. If you can't do that, and that's a little harsh, honestly, when I draw the structure, I might draw kind of my perfect structure, and then I might create a role for my high pot so that I can get him him or her, the right level of exposure, the right level in the organization, get them to the executive table so they can see how we think, see how we deal with the business. So this is what I mean by, like, there's no perfect structure. There I say, let me build the perfect structure. I've got high performers in every role, but no high potentials that have levels in them. And then I modify the structure to accommodate a high potential. So that's done all the time, by the way. And you might want to look at your executive team of, are they blocking the younger talent from moving up into the organization and taking over? I'll give you an example. We've got one CEO we work with, and he had, it was 3 very high seniority leaders in his business that, frankly, we could have called them Dr. No or something, because they just were not moving the business forward. They were obstructing the business at some level, whether it was passive aggressive or overtly, they were obstructing the business. So one day, Steve is his name. He goes in, he goes, "That's it. You're all done." Bang, bang, bang. 3 of them gone. Before it was 3. And he had a bunch of young people underneath them that were being suppressed with a lot of potential. He elevated all them to the executive team. And he has been a happy individual ever since, because they are super happy to be there. They're performing like crazy. They're running hard for him. They're also less expensive, small side benefit. That wasn't his goal in the objective. And the business began to really grow because you've got the right level of focus, energy, and attention on it. So players, right? Performers are great, but just be careful of them blocking. Look to make sure there's room in your high pots when you design the structure. The one thing to be careful of here, just as I talked about titles, and don't kvetch much about titles, but the other problem is what I call testicular escalation or testicular inflation. And this is that, hey, Maria, I can't give you any more money, but I'm going to put a senior in front of your title. So now you're senior president or senior vice president. And then when I can't give her money next time, she's a senior executive vice president. And before you know it, you're like a bank, and a vice president is cashing paychecks on Friday. Like, everybody's a vice president. So you just got to be a little careful about that. Why? Because A, people think you mean it. And B, when they go to the market and they look at what a senior executive vice president makes, they're going to find that they're massively undercompensated. So you're going to create a problem for yourself in the future if you give away titles like, Halloween candy. You got to be thoughtful about titles, because while it feels good in the moment, you're just kicking the can down the road, and you're creating a long-term problem on that. So what about span of control? That's the other thing to think about as you design an organization. The normal number, which is in span of control, means how many people should somebody have working for them. My answer is 7 plus or minus 2. 7 plus or minus 2. 7's the happy spot. We can go down to 5. or we could go up to 9 in some circumstances. I'm going to talk about when. One is experience. So if I've got a relatively high experience leader or a very experienced team, or even both, I can move to higher numbers. I talked to one CEO who had been doing the job for, 30 years or something. And he had like 14 direct reports. Well, honestly, and they were all senior too. That worked. They didn't need to talk that much. They all knew what they were doing. He knew what he was doing. 14 worked. For a normal human being in a normal organization, that's about double what you normally want. It worked for him because of the level of experience in the organization. So I'm gonna just look at that. 7's the number, but it depends. So if you've got a lot of junior people on your team where you've got to pour into them, you've got to invest time in them, coaching time in them, you want to be a bit lower. If you're not incredibly experienced, you probably want to be a little bit lower because more makes the job more difficult. The other element to think about is how dynamic is my environment. In a high dynamic environment, changing all the time, right? It's moving, it's changing. We got to be on top of it. The numbers got to be a bit smaller because you can't spend enough time with 10, 12 people to get the information flows you need to be on top of the business. So when you've got high information flows, dynamic environment, what they call VUCU, VUC, variable, uncertain, whatever, or VUCA it's called. You need less people working for you, not more people working for you, because the flows don't work. Now, technology can help, don't get me wrong, but there's only so many hours that you can consume information and do your job. So more volume, smaller number of people. The other thing to think about is the nature of the work. So in relatively creative, high-touch work, sales, marketing, engineering, variety of other professional type of jobs, you probably want to be a little smaller. For jobs that are highly routinized, meaning routine, call center. I could probably have more people working for me in a call center when all of the people are doing exactly the same job. So you could see somebody leading a pod in a call center, and they might have 20 people working for them. And that's okay, because every one of those people is doing exactly the same job all the time, every day of the week. And I shouldn't need to engage as much. When the nature of the work is more diverse than that, less certain than that, less controlled than that, less routinized, again, smaller level of control. So let's just do a little math of like when you need middle management. So if you think about it, you got you. Let's say you got 7 people working for you. That's your executive team. And then they all have 7 people working for them. Now, it never quite works out like that, but let's just do 7 because some have 3 and some have 10, but you get the picture. So they have 7 working for them. Well, 7 times 7 is 49. So you and the 49 is 50 plus 7 more, 57. I don't need a middle management layer. Let's jump that up. Now, the people that work for you have 7 people reporting them. That's 350 people at the third layer down. And the total company is 400-ish, right? So somewhere between 50 and 400, you're going to get a middle management layer, meaning somebody between the executive and the person doing the work. That's middle management. And you need to have it. I've got one organization I work with. They've got 4 people in management and like 400 people in the company and very little, and like supervisors, no middle management. And it's a real problem because they don't have people to coordinate work or do projects or move things forward for them. Super, super thin administrative structure. In a really low margin business, that can make some kind of sense, but it's very hard to make progress when you have so little middle management. So if you're in that 100, 75, 150, you really ought to be thinking about middle management. And we have seen it where somebody doesn't invest in middle management. They grow to these numbers. And let me tell you why, because middle management is profoundly unsexy. It's great to hire really senior executives. We love that. Like they're super smart and they're capable and they went to wherever and and they're fun to work with. And people that earn you money every day are very fun to invest in, right? They do the work for the clients. They make us the money every day. All good. The thing in the middle management, it's a little hard. Like they're not that people that work with me directly and they're not obviously making me money every day. So particularly entrepreneurs are very, very slow to invest in middle management. Normally, that's not everybody, but normally. And what happens is they grow, and all of a sudden errors start to happen and people can't keep track of it. And the organization gets under massive stress. And those are all signs. And they stop growing, believe it or not. And those are all signs of the lack of a good middle management. So we've had companies that did this. They stepped back, they hired in and developed a middle management layer, and then they began to grow again because they had the capacity to grow. So remember, at somewhere between 50 and 400, you darn well better be thinking and planning for a quality middle management layer, or you're not going to get where you want to get. And maybe the last topic is just the impact of reorganization. I talked a little bit about it before, about going back to restarting the teaming, reestablishing capability. But there is another couple of elements here that are worth thinking about, and that is part of the power, and I've talked about power before in some articles I've written, but part of the power of a manager and a middle manager is their social network and their ability to influence other people. Those are both forms of power that are important to you because that's how they get things done. So social networks and influence are important. Those things get established over time. In fact, one of the really key characteristics of a senior leader is the quality of their network inside the organization, because that is the way they transmit power. That's the way they get things done in an organization. So let's say I'm sitting here running whatever process for you. You reorganize me and you move all my cheese around, right? All my relationships get messed up. The people I have to work with are completely different. The people I've got deep long-term relationships are in another part of the business now. You just made me really ineffective as a leader. And you didn't mean to. Like, you're just trying to put the boxes in the right order and get performance, but you just dropped the performance of every leader in your organization because you disrupted their social networks and you disrupted all of their influence pathways, which they then have to reestablish in order to be effective again. So it's like the very squishy soft side of what happens when you reorganize. It's not all boxes on, the whiteboard with names in them. When you just massively disrupt social and power networks, it goes back to what happens in team performance. You reset it and people have to rebuild these capabilities to execute, and then you begin to get the performance. So you got to be really sure you want to reorganize, because you do it and it's we were at level 5, we reorganized and we immediately stayed at level 5 and we started moving to 6, 7, 8, whatever that scale is. If you're at 5 and you reorganize, you're going down to 3.5, and then work hopefully your way back up over 5 over time. Maybe just the last thought on reorgs and structure and so forth is I'm actually a fan of occasionally doing it. I know I was kind of negative there for a little bit, but I'm kind of a fan of it because each organization optimizes the company in a different way. So if I organize functionally, I might optimize the functions of those the engineering, the marketing, the sales processes. Let's say I flip it and I organize by process. And so there's some marketing and some engineering and some sales and some finance all together in one process over time, with maybe dotted line back to their functional leader so that there's some expertise in the business. That optimizes in a different way. So all these things that got fat and flabby and inefficient with a verticalized, a functional structure will now be optimized in this sort of process-oriented function. While I'm doing that, I may lose something on the functional capability, but you know what? We play this game of moving from one to another over a longer cycle. Again, we don't want to jerk people around too hard. And you get multiple forms of optimization through changes in reorganization. So there is a value in it. There's no doubt about it. And particularly when you're not delivering the numbers, then you have to do it. But even if you are, sometimes a little twiggle in the organization makes sense because you look at the problem differently and you get a little different outcome as a result of it. So that's a bit on organizational design, strategy driving structure, span of control being important, thinking about where you put high performers and low performers. By the way, you tuck low performers where they're not, the process isn't as critical, by the way. The impact of reorganization on people and, what's it going to do for you as a company. And again, there's no perfect organization. Doesn't exist. There's no perfect comp plan. There's no perfect organization. You just got to pick the one you like and live with it. So on that note, I wish you good luck. It's a difficult problem, and it's got a lot of variables to deal with as leaders. And hopefully we touched on a few of them and gave you a little bit of clarity. We'll see you next time on the Lazy CEO podcast. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.